Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is the Treetop Flyer coming back at you again for parts 4 and 5 of our Living Permaculture series. We gave you parts 2 and 3 a little earlier in the summer for the solstice celebration in our Living Permaculture series on the longest day of the summer, the solstice. And so we want to follow up now in early fall Indian summer, a time of the year that I love very dearly. It's the harvest season. It's hunting season. I'm an avid archer and bow hunter, so I love hunting season. It's a busy and intense time of the year because we, and hopefully you, will be putting up for harvest the food that you grew spring, summer, and into fall. And we hope you had a very bountiful and abundant harvest. We certainly did. Best year ever for us. But it's a wonderful transitional time of the year. We just passed the full moon of September, and the rut has begun. That's the breeding season for elk and deer, and they're out and about in the forest doing their rituals of mating and the dance and the fighting and everything that goes along with recreating their species. And you can hear their calls in the forest and at night under the moonlight. Everything is very active this time of the year, not only in breeding but eating and putting up and on as much weight and food as they can possibly find, because winter's coming, and that's a long, cold, wet, difficult season in which to survive, not only for humans but for all the animal species as well. So everything is eating everything it can find right now. So you have to sometimes protect your garden as you're harvesting. We have stellars, jays, and many birds coming and trying to pick the corn even ahead of us and eat the corn as it's ripening here in Indian summer, early fall. It's also a wonderful transitional time for a permaculture understanding, because everything changes in our maritime climate here. If you've noticed, the weather is cooler. We've had some rain and some cool overcast days, which have changed everything. The plants become reinvigorated. The soil loosens up and absorbs the moisture that we've now had, instead of being baked and hard and dry and very hard to even get water to stay in the soil for the plants. And the soil becomes crumbly and loose again, so it's a good time for weeding and getting rid of excess foliage that you don't want. And it's also a time for pruning excess foliage and pruning back your berry plants and fruit trees and stuff like that. I like to do it this time of the year and get it done along with putting up firewood and harvesting the food and putting up all the food for the winter, because once we get into hard rains and wind and the stormy seasons of November and December, you can get hurricane force winds, and you can get ice storms, and of course snow coming later in the mountains, and that can damage your fruit trees and your berries. So I like to get my pruning done in the fall during the dark of the moon time of the year, and that seems to make sense to keep damage from happening, but also the plants seem to respond very well to that. So again, our intention with our Living Permaculture series is to give you knowledge and skills, and then hopefully you'll turn that into experience for a permaculture lifestyle of self-sufficiency and a more graceful, harmonious way of living on this planet, with this planet and all its species. That's what permaculture and self-sufficient homesteading is all about. It's also about helping you to make a transition to that type of lifestyle as the true solutions to the crises now engulfing this planet in some very intense ways. So that's what we're doing. We're sharing not only the way we live and the way I've taught and advised many of my permaculture clients and students on how to live and be truly sustainable and live in a preparedness consciousness should you have events in nature or the events of man and social upheavals that put you in a difficult circumstance, as you now see happening all over the world. Look at the humanitarian crises engulfing all of the Mediterranean, with very large numbers of refugees fleeing from very difficult situations in their countries, desperate to find a place to avoid destruction and death and survival, absolute survival. So we want to help prepare you for those kind of events, as well as living a self-sufficient, permaculture-oriented lifestyle. Also, it's designed to give the true solutions in sustainable living instead of the artificial, contrived, forced non-solutions that government at every level, local, state, federal, and world governments are trying to impose upon the people, much against their will. And when that happens, it's always a situation that spirals downward into tyranny and oppression, and you can't do these things by coercion, force, and menace. It has to be a choice. It has to be a lifestyle that is truly sustainable by your choice and that you're aligned with that, or there's no freedom in it. And freedom is all important. So today, our Living Permaculture episode is going to be about tools and metal and metallurgy and the use of them and sharpening them. It's a subject that's very near and dear to my heart and my experience, and I'm coming at it from a more comprehensive approach and background and experience than what I've seen other people do on YouTube and many other videos that are out there in the survival skills educational world and in the preparedness material out there, because I'm coming at it from a background and experience as a craftsman. I've been a builder and a craftsman all my life in many different areas: boat building, timber framing, fine furniture, cabinet making, traditional archery, bow making. All these areas as a craftsman, I've used literally hundreds and hundreds of types of fine metal tools in those trades. So I'm coming at it from the direction as a craftsman. I'm coming at it from the direction of a martial artist. I've been a martial artist and a martial arts instructor all my life. So in terms of fine metal edged weapons and traditional things in the martial arts world, I'm coming at it from that angle. Then I'm coming at it from the experience as a off-grid, self-sufficient homesteading individual. I've lived that way all my adult life. So all the tools of farming and agriculture and wood procurement and self-sufficient homesteading, I've got that in as well. And then the direction as a survival skill instructor, wilderness survival skills, I'm also that, and I'm coming at it from that angle and bringing in all about knives and machetes and hatchets and axes and things that are leaning more toward the survival skills and preparedness area, and as a preparedness consultant as well. So I'm kind of trying to bring all these pieces together in a comprehensive way, because a lot of the things I've seen that have been put out there are much more narrow in their focus, and I felt I had something to contribute in a comprehensive way on those subjects. So today we're going to lean a little more in the beginning into the wilderness survival skills and preparedness area, and get into how that works into long-term preparedness, homesteading, self-sufficient living, should you decide to go that direction by choice or find yourself needing to go that direction if things continue. Okay, it's a lovely Indian summer day, and if you may have noticed, this time of year, one of the other things that shifts and changes is the sun seems to dramatically change in its arc and its angle. Very important for your fall gardening, and that helps to bring about many of these changes in plants and soil and animals as we head into later part of the fall and into winter. So we're losing our sun very quickly. It's now about noon, and the sun is even quite low and starting to arc down quite rapidly. So the first part of this is going to be leaning toward the wilderness survival skills and preparedness areas, and then we're going to get into the butchering tools and the homesteading and the permaculture long-term lifestyle kind of living stuff in kind of the second part of it. So I'm going to start over here. Now I'm showing you my collection, our collection, that we use on a daily basis. We have multiples of many of them because we keep several backpacks of different configurations. I'll show you some of them later. Different sizes, shapes, and configurations prepared all the time for various things that we do. Whether it's a personal recreational outing, whether it is a wilderness survival skills class that I'm teaching and facilitating for others, a preparedness consulting type of workshop as to demonstrate to people different backpack preparedness configurations, all the way into long-term serious bug-out bag, take everything you got, put it on your back and go type backpacks. And I'm really into backpacks. I love them. I have many of them. So we're going to show you some of that and the essential tools that you need for those. As I've stated before, I prefer vintage high carbon tool steel for all cutting edge tools, whether it's craftsmanship tools, survival tools, knives, axes, machetes, hatchets, the whole nine yards. Look for the good old ones. They're everywhere. You can find them. You usually have to clean them up and sharpen them and get them back in good condition. We'll show you a little bit how to do that. And don't buy cheap junk. These are essential survival homesteading type tool. Get the best you can afford, and I find the best that I can afford is vintage old ones. So look for those. So I'm going to start here. We have them lined up with machetes of various sizes, and actually a sword, all the way down to smaller machetes, to real survival hunting, all-round bushcraft type knives, some throwing knives, martial arts knives, multi-tools, traditional pocket knives, and then we have axes, hatchets of various configurations and sizes. We'll get to all that. So let's start with machetes. Wonderful tool. Now, these are Collins. I prefer Collins brand, vintage ones with the distal taper, which means the thickness of the blade tapers as it goes out toward the tip. Machetes are spring steel, high carbon steel. You see they flex. They're spring steel. They're made up with a different type of steel than your survival knives. High carbon, still high carbon steel, but the knives are not spring steel. They're not designed to flex. A machete, you are whacking and you are hacking your way through the brush, or perhaps even using it as a self-defense tool, like a sword. They need to have flexibility and resilience to be able to do that, but have to be high carbon tool steel to hold an edge, chopping through brush and small trees and all kinds of foliage. So I have many of them. Now, if you go to third world countries, particularly tropical jungle third world countries, the machete is the ultimate survival bushcraft tool. They do everything with it. Many people in the survival and preparedness world are always talking about their survival knives, and some of them are very large and cumbersome, and they try to make one knife do all things in a survival and bushcraft situations. That's not really wise. If you only have one, you can do that, but you're likely to damage your knives. So if you're doing bushwhacking and you're hacking through the brush and all that kind of stuff, a machete is the proper tool to use and much less likely to be damaged. Obviously, it has much greater reach. You can reach out further and not harm your hands through briars and brambles and things with thorns that can injure you, and you don't want to injure yourself in those kind of circumstances. So the machete is a better tool for that, and for splitting firewood and making debris huts and shelters. The machete can do a lot of things, obviously, much better than a survival knife. A knife can do it if you have to, but even the hatchets and the small axes that I'll show later will do that better than a knife. So you have to learn the skills of appropriate tool use and know the right tool for the job. One size does not fit all, and one tool does not fit all circumstances, and it's certainly not wise to try to use them this way. So I have machetes, as you see here, of different sizes and slightly different weights for various things. If I'm in carrying a backpack and I'm not in a very, very long-term outing or long-term survival situation, I'm going to prefer a smaller one this size, these are hard to find, that I can actually even wear in a sheath like a knife on me, strap it in various places, or put it strapped onto a small day pack backpack. And it's a little easier to carry, obviously, than one this size. So I have machetes in all ranges and sizes and weights. I love these little ones. Now these are much better for hacking through the brush and things than a survival knife, and as I said, you're much less likely to damage an essential tool. In third world countries, go there. You'll see they do everything with their machete, and it's the one tool they're not without. And I highly recommend you obtain them. I keep one in my vehicle at all times, along with a preparedness-oriented backpack if I have an emergency on the road or some situation happens where I have to walk and be prepared for some period of time. You should have your preparedness backpack in your vehicle, in your home, ready to go. And I like to keep one of these small machetes in it as well. The larger backpacks are longer term kind of things, or if I know I'm really going into dense brush or for a longer term, then I would want a larger one. So there's various types here, different sizes. You see slightly more slender. This one is actually like what they call a banana knife that they use down in places where they harvest bananas for chopping bananas from the trees and harvesting other agricultural crops, sugarcane and bananas and such. Here's a vintage World War II period one, a very heavy, thick one, almost like the thickness of a leaf spring from an automobile, but it was one that was actually manufactured. This is Sheffield, England. Very, very fine, high carbon vintage tool steel, and these were issued to many of the British troops in the war that were serving in tropical areas, Philippines and the Pacific and Southeast Asia and stuff like that. It's a short but very heavy whacker for really even going through thicker, heavier brush or using to procure firewood. This one is excellent for splitting firewood for your campfire or your cooking fires and such. And of course you can put it on the wood and beat it with a stick or a maul or a piece of wood and actually use it like a very fine splitting tool for making your smaller kindling and firewood. So I like that. Very heavy, vintage World War II. This is actually a ninja style sword, which I put in here just to show you some different types of blade configurations and styles. designed to be worn on the back and still give you a lot of agility and the ability to fight and be lightly carried weaponry. We'll get in more on another video with all types of swords and weapons. I'm also coming at this from having made knives and swords and edge tools as a blacksmith and a knife maker and sword maker, because I've always wanted to get in to be able to make my own if I had to. And even I've studied some very primitive ancient metallurgy and blacksmithing methods when you don't have all the nice forge and blacksmithing tools. So those are all really good areas of knowledge and skill to know. So now let's get into the proverbial survival knives. Again, I have a collection here that I found work well for everything that are old high carbon tool steel. I've got several of them here. You'll see each of these is in my own custom style of sheath to carry the knife. And I designed these and made these myself because I wasn't happy with what was available out there on the market without paying ridiculous amounts of money. So I designed them and made them myself. The idea being, I like to carry them sometimes here. I like to be able to carry them sometimes on my leg, even on my calf and lower leg, or strap them onto a backpack and have them in various positions. When you're carrying a backpack and you're moving through the brush, you don't have to stop and take your backpack off and unpack everything and dig for your survival knife, and it's not always comfortable to carry them on a belt or on your side when you're carrying a backpack, because the backpack or the hip pads and the belt that holds it tends to rub on it, and it kind of is uncomfortable. So I've learned to make up custom sheaths that not only carry those in different positions, but also give me extra survival tool holding capacity. You see, I have sharpening stones that slide in a little pocket in the back of these. So I always have the ability to sharpen my knives even in the field. That's really important. I've made up some that even strap a small flashlight and 100 feet of military spec paracord. So you have cordage, you have fire starting ability, you have sharpening ability, you have your all-round hunting, survival, bushcraft type knife. These are World War II vintage military issue K-bar knives, called the K-bar. They were issued in slightly different sizes and configurations for each of the branches of the military in World War II. The Marines, the Army, and even the Navy. And the MK2, what's called the MK2, slightly lighter, was for Navy. And I actually like those the best. But these are K-bars, and I like them because they're a true smaller Bowie style survival knife with two cutting edges. The clip point here is it called. I sharpen that, so for butchering animals or cutting or doing delicate work, I have two cutting edges. Or as a self-defense fighting knife, they actually were designed for a fighting knife, a survival knife, and all purpose. What I also very much like about them is they have the solid steel end cap, which is excellent for pounding, for mashing things, for driving in tent stakes, for many uses where you want to be able to pound with the end of the knife almost like a hammer, and as self-defense and fighting skills as well. But you don't want to destroy your knife. And many knives are not really made up with a solid enough end cap to endure that kind of use. But I like the K-bar. It's a wonderful all-round tool. It has the guard upon the hand. It's a fixed blade tool. It's not a folding knife like these pocket knives. They're good for some things, but they're not your ideal survival skills bushcraft type knife because the blades fold. And unless they're a lock blade kind of knife, if the blade folds against your fingers, you can sustain a very serious injury. So in the survival skills world, when we talk about a fixed blade, that's what we mean. It does not fold. And you must have one or more knives of fixed blade type configuration. They don't need to be big old Rambo things because none of you are really big enough and strong enough to really handle that. And they're very awkward and clumsy for bushcraft, fire making, butchering, preparing food, preparing traps and snares, preparing debris huts, preparing materials to make baskets, and all the things that we call survival bushcraft. Large knives aren't any good for that because they're too awkward, too cumbersome, and too hard to lose. Now, I teach survival skills and preparedness and permaculture and all these things to women as well, sometimes even as young as teenage girls. So you want tools that can be effectively handled by everyone. Women as well. Women are into this stuff. This is not just guy stuff. I don't want you to think this is guy stuff because it is, but it isn't. My lovely wife does all of these things. So I like the K-bars, and I like having them in my own design of sheath that protects them and allows them to be worn different places. Now, these are leather, and I have to admit, over many, many years of living here in the Pacific Northwest, where it's very, very wet, living in the rainforest, here we are in the coastal rainforest again, rust. Rust is a very serious problem with high carbon tool steel. These are not stainless steel, so they will rust. And leather sheaths tend to attract the moisture a little bit, or if you get them wet by going through the creeks in the wet brush, which you will if you're out in the bush here, they get wet, they dry out more slowly, they get stiff, and or they hold the moisture and can tend to transmit rust onto your tools. So with these high carbon tool steel knives, axes, machetes, all of this, you have to be very vigilant. You have to be eternally vigilant and constantly work to keep the rust off. And I coat them with oil, and sometimes I wax them, and I've even taken to putting varnish and or lacquering some of them when I put them up for storage when I'm not going to use them for a while. Because it's so wet here, they will rust. Don't just take them and stick them away and don't use them and think that they will maintain themselves, because they won't, and you'll go and you'll freak out when you find them all rusty. So take care of your fine tools. I have these knives in various sizes and the sheaths in various sizes. Now let's go down from the K-bar to the PAL. It's called the PAL, P-A-L, and I have them in a number of different sizes. They were also World War II issue survival knives, and they have very, very, very good edge holding capability. They're slightly harder than the K-bars, and but still not so hard that they're difficult to sharpen or brittle. So they're an excellent all-round bushcraft survival knife. Particularly some of the blades are shaped with a angled bevel all the way, and they're very good for many bushcraft operations. Some of them are parkerized, which means they have a coating on them to resist the rust, and that's excellent. So these RH36, they're called PAL knives. They're excellent. They're very much the same configuration as the K-bar, but they do not have a solid flat end cap on the end. They have a metal end cap that's very nice, but it's kind of oval and rounded. Now that is effective sometimes for pounding and mashing and kneading, which you may need to do, but they're not as heavy duty and indestructible as the metal cap on the K-bars, and if you beat on them too much, you're likely to damage them. But I love the PALs because they're a good all-round hunting, skinning, butchering, bushcraft survival knife, and they really work. And they hold their edge quite nicely. So you see I have several different sizes of them. This one belongs to my wife. This is one. Now, like again, I keep the smaller ones in my smaller backpacks because I keep these backpacks packed all the time, and I'm constantly adjusting them. And they always have water, food, fire starting materials, cordage, all-round survival knives and survival tools, usually a small machete, usually some articles of clothing and or waterproof protection, which is your shelter, and a number of other tools and things necessary for short-term to long-term emergency or survival situations. Here's another small, a very nice small K-bar that is kind of a rare one. Now I'm always obtaining these when I find them for reasonable prices, and I collect them not just to be a collector, but I collect them to have and to provide them for my students to take my classes. So I'm always looking for them, and this is a very nice rare small K-bar that's a small one that's really good for fire starting material and bushcraft and making shavings to get your fire going and traps and snares and stuff. One of the smallest K-bars issued of the World War II vintage. So there's a range of those. I hope you can see them well. Now another knife I always keep. Now I also have these tactical vests made up. These are military issue tactical vests, which are quite popular in the survival skills world, because sometimes you don't want a backpack. Sometimes you want to be able to carry essential gear and supplies and equipment without the weight and the heat and the cumbersomeness of a backpack. In other words, you can move a little faster, you're a little more agile, they're lighter weight, but still you can pack with all these little pockets. You can pack a lot of essential gear. And there's many different configurations. Some of the fishing and hunting jackets that sportsmen use have lots of pockets inside, outside, are also excellent as tactical vests, or if you're in a desert or hot climate, carrying a hot, heavy backpack is not a lot of fun. So, tactical vests that breathe. They have a web mesh that allow your body to not overheat so quickly, but still many pockets. So I like these tactical vests, and I keep the pockets in them full of what I need for any kind of tactical situation. So one of the things I always have there is throwing knives. Now these are specially made, very nicely balanced, stainless steel, indestructible throwing knives that are designed to be thrown. Because if you, now I can throw these other knives and you can do that, but if you start throwing your other knives, you're going to beat them up and damage them. And it's better to have one that is a single solid piece of steel. Now it's actually also a very good knife for skinning. The shape of it is very nice for skinning and other sorts of bushcraft, and it's absolutely indestructible because it's a single piece of steel and good steel. So I always carry a throwing knife that I can reach in my clothing, on my belt, and my tactical vest or my backpacks. So it's a good thing to have. Now we'll go on to multi-tools. I love multi-tools. If I'm awake and I'm dressed and I have pants on, I have a belt with a little sheath and a pouch, and I'll have a multi-knife on me. If I'm wearing pants, I got one of these. Multi-tools are designed as excellent multi-tool survival tools, and they come in all kinds of configurations. I like this particular one. This is a Leatherman called the Leatherman Blast. They have a number of different sizes. Surgical grade scissors for, fine work, sewing, repairing clothing, repairing backpacks. Actually, I've used these for actual field surgery when people were injured. Cutting your nails, cutting your hair, cutting materials, all kinds of things. I really love the surgical grade scissors. They have a number of different types of screwdrivers. They have can openers, bottle openers, and metal can, tuna or canned meat type can openers in them. Excellent file for filing metal or filing your nails or filing and sharpening. They have a really wonderful saw, which I am constantly using. Excellent little saw. Cuts both on the pull and the push. Really good for notching, cutting traps and snares, cutting small things, bone and sinew, and butchering and a butchering application. Superb tool for many bushcraft things. And they have a standard bladed knife. Okay, and the good thing about them is they are fixed when you need to use them. Now, they're a little more awkward for much of your survival skills and bushcraft kind of stuff than a single knife or a single tool. But the idea that you can carry a multi-tool with many different functions is a great thing, and you should always have them. They should always be in your preparedness backpacks, your bug-out bag, your long-term survival skills bag, in your car. As I said, if my pants are on, I've got one on. They also have these excellent pliers. Pliers with wire cutters. I use them when I'm a musician. When I'm out playing a concert and the string breaks, I have to change strings on my guitar. Well, I use these. You know, they got these needle nose pliers, they got the wire cutters, they got everything you need for emergency repairs. I've repaired my car out on the road many a time with just this. So multi-tools, they come in many configurations. Of course, there is the famous Swiss Army knife, which is also a wonderful multi-tool. I used to always carry one of those, but over time I've found these larger multi-tool Gerber and Leatherman and various other types multi-tools are a little more to my liking than the Swiss Army knife. But that's an excellent tool as well, and they work. So you should have those. Now, we go from there down into small traditional pocket knives for sportsmen, for craftsmen. You should always have a few of these. Now, these are delicate small blades for doing all kinds of fine work, whether you're whittling and carving, whether you're fishing and preparing lures and traps and snares, or very fine detailed skinning and tanning of hides and work of that nature. Sometimes you need little knives to get in there difficult places that are obviously kind of cumbersome with a larger survival knife. We're going to get into the butchering knives in a little bit for use on the homestead. But I'm always carrying some very fine, thin, I hope you can see that, very sharp, angled, delicate pocket knife type blades with multiple blades on them too. Again, if I'm wearing pants, I always have one of these in my pocket as well as my multi-tool, because they're very wonderful. I like the Case brand XX. Case is a knife manufacturer. Very good steel, particularly the old ones that are high carbon knife steel. And they have a XX brand on them, or the Bullet. These are Bullet ones too. Superb, long-lasting, functional, traditional pocket knives. I've had these since I was a child, you know, and used them for all kinds of stuff. So I'm always with, I don't like to do the one knife, one tool fits all circumstances. If you have only that, then you have to make best with what you can do. But I like to have some of each of these, and it doesn't get into too much weight and too much difficulty to carry this combination that I'm showing you. Another knife here, these are the more modern tactical lock blade type knives that have the release. You press the release and they fold. Folding blade knives that have the serrated edge for cutting ropes and heavy cordage and modern nylon cordage. These are popular tactical knives with military and rescue personnel and emergency services people. And I generally don't like serrated edges on my survival knives because I really don't find them to be that helpful. And they're harder to sharpen. So most of the knives that have that kind of configuration on them are kind of designed to, you're not supposed to sharpen them, but they will get dull, and then you can pretty much only sharpen the flat side on a stone. We'll show that a little later. But I do carry them for certain kinds of things, and it's nice to have them. They're folders. You can carry them in even small pockets, okay? So I think I've covered pretty well the range of knives. Again, you must always have sharpening stones or diamond hone or honing stones to hone your knives, and always keep them very sharp. We'll show you a little bit later as a demonstration just how sharp these are. And they need to be razor sharp. They need to be able to shave hair. They need to be able to cut very finely and not tear sometimes. So the art of getting machetes, knives, hatchets, axes, razor sharp, it takes a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge. So we're going to show that over a period of time. I could do a whole class and a whole video that's just on that. Well, we're just going to give you some of the beginning basics today on it, but there's a lot to it. All right, so now as we move into heavier bushcraft type operations or your homesteading skills and self-sufficient living, we're getting into axes, hatchets, and adzes of various sorts, because they're very wonderful tool. Now, so let's start with a small, what I call like a camp hatchet. This one's small enough that it could be carried in a backpack for survival kind of situations, but you're starting to get a little bit heavy. But I like to have one because a camp hatchet is much better for all things regarding firewood procurement and cutting heavy brush, that it might even take you quite a bit of time with a machete. A camp hatchet or a small axe will do that much more effectively. The old-time trappers and old-time woodmen always had these. Timber cruisers and people who spent a lot of time in the forest would always have hatchets and small axes. So I use these around the homestead for clearing brush and land and splitting wood and limbing off of trees, cutting the limbs. It's much easier to do that. Now this is one of my favorite. This is actually a limbing axe, a small limbing axe, and it's designed to be very tapered for when you drop a tree or a tree is down and you need to take all the branches off it so you can cut it up into firewood. You chop the branches off with a limbing axe and it will cut them very cleanly and make your firewood procurement much easier. Also, for log cabin building, for primitive shelters like all the old-time pioneer people, they built their entire house with a couple different axes and hatchets. That's all they had. So for making log cabins and hewing timbers, we're going to get into some of that, but for notching and chopping and making V-cuts and cutting, you know, I use this quite often in my firewood procurement to actually cut the wood into blocks, into bolts to split into firewood. If you don't have a saw or you don't have a chainsaw, one of these days you might not have a chainsaw. Your chainsaw could be broke. Last 2 years I put up all my firewood without a chainsaw. And so if you're going to do that, you're going to go to smaller diameter wood. You're going to use an axe and hatchet and a splitting maul and prepare your firewood without the use of a crosscut saw or a chainsaw. Chainsaw is a wonderful tool if you can keep it running and you have access to the oil and the gasoline and parts, spare parts and chains and chainsaw files and all that. You may not have that in the future, or if you're way out in the brush, you may not have that. And of course, it's very heavy and cumbersome to carry a chainsaw. So these are much more effective if you have the bushcraft skills and the woodsman skill to know how to use them properly. So that's a limbing hatchet. Now, this one I use when I'm doing small firewood, and I use it single-handedly, and I cut branches, because I put up a lot of firewood simply salvaging down and dead branches. I never cut live trees unless they're a danger. I prefer what nature gives you that's fallen, that's dead, that's down, that's on the side of the road, or that is being shed by branches every time we have a storm. You can put up tons and tons of firewood this way that normally is wasted, and branches are a denser wood than the trunk of a tree, and they will burn very hot and very effectively. Obviously not as long as a big log, but they give you more BTUs per inch because of denser, tighter growth rings than the trunk of the tree. So I try to put up as much firewood and clean up the forest for you and the animals, so you're not stumbling around on all this down debris and brush. It's also healthy for the forest because you don't have the materials that will catch fire. Oh my gosh, what a year we've had in the Pacific Northwest for forest fires, and throughout the West this is an issue as we are in this seemingly long-term, hot, dry kind of cycle. And it is a cycle, and it is being enhanced by humans, but it's not totally caused by humans, I do not believe. So, limbing hatchets and axes. This one's slightly larger. It's not so big that I can't use it single-handed or tool-handed, or if you're in places where you have to cut trees or prepare firewood where you don't have a lot of room to swing because there's a lot of stuff around you, you can get in close and still use these to do what you need to do. For debris huts and building, unparalleled. Excellent. Now, here's a small double-bet felling axe. When the axe has a cutting edge on two sides, that's a true felling axe. Here's a nice small one. Excellent for bringing down small trees. If you're going to cut bigger trees, you need a larger one like the old pioneer lumberjacks and loggers used, and can imagine what work that was to cut giant trees with simply an axe and a crosscut saw. So I use this also for limbing, going down a tree, taking all the limbs off before I'm going to use it as a building material or for firewood. Now, the idea of the double bit felling axe is that one end has a steeper bevel than the other, and the steeper bevel is for cutting the beginning of your notch to fell a tree, and then when you're into the tree and your notch is narrow, you use the narrower one with the longer tapered bevel, and that's why it's a double bit felling axe. I highly recommend every homestead, every permaculture kind of lifestyle person, or anyone who's into preparedness or survival skills, pick these up. They're wonderful. And of course, here is a larger one. If you're really going to be felling big trees, this is the one you want. And it's the same tool, just a larger, heavier one. Got to have some strength to use that. Now, here's another type of hatchet altogether. These are hewing hatchets. You'll notice the way they're ground. The bevel that is ground is on one side only, and if you're right-handed, it's on the right-hand side. The back of the hatchet is flat because it's designed as a hewing tool. In other words, I use these as a craftsman. This is a traditional archery bow stave. I've made traditional archery bows for many, many years and teach people in classes how to do it as well. And as a craftsman, I've used these in boat building, in furniture making, in gun stocking, in making archery bows, or for carving and sculpture for purely artistic kind of things as well. The idea with a hewing hatchet is it's not for firewood. It's for shaping and preparing things as a craftsman. And the way you use it is you go like so, and you make stop cuts along the side. Can you see that in the camera there? Perhaps tilt the camera down so you can see it. You make stop cuts like that, and then you hew right down to those. And you can hew right in a nice straight line or a curved line or what have you. See there? To shape something. In other words, if this is a bow stave, I'd put a center line on it and I would draw out the pattern of the limbs of the bow, and then I would rough it out very quickly in this manner with a hewing hatchet. You see, you choke up on it, use it more closely like this, and you make your stop cuts. That allows you to control the line of the cut and follow your pattern. So these are hewing hatchets. Wonderful tool, wonderful tool. If you look at the old great boat building era, the great ships, boat builders used many different types of hewing hatchets to shape the curved parts. They had no machinery, no power tools, nothing electric, so that was all done by hand tools with various adzes and axes and hatchets and traditional boat building tools. So I've also always been into that and love that, and so I collect these tools for that purposes. You see different sizes, same kind of design. These are called Kent pattern hewing